The dust rose in swirls across the open plain as Wade Blackett slowed his palomino to a walk, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. That's when he saw her, a slender figure on her knees beside a small mound of freshly turned earth, her shoulders shaking with silent grief. A small wooden cross fashioned from twigs bound with twine marked the tiny grave, and beside it, a single baby boot lay in her open palm before she placed it gently into the shallow hole. Montana Territory, 1878. The land was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, and Wade knew better than most that survival out here came at a steep price. He'd been riding for 2 days straight, following rumors of work at a cattle ranch near Helena when he'd come across this private moment of mourning. Something in him wouldn't allow him to simply ride on. Wade dismounted, removed his worn leather hat, and approached slowly, his spurs jingling softly with each step. The woman didn't look up, her honey-brown hair falling in waves across her face as she patted the last of the soil over the buried boot. "Pardon me, madam," Wade said softly, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't mean to intrude," she startled, turning quickly to face him. Her eyes were the color of sage after rain, rimmed red from crying, but there was a fierceness in them that spoke of a spirit not easily broken. "Are you in need of assistance?" he continued when she didn't speak. "No," she finally answered, her voice cracking. "There's nothing to be done now." Wade nodded, understanding the finality in her tone. "The name's Wade Blackett, madam. I'll be moving on if you'd prefer, but—" He hesitated, scanning the horizon. "It'll be dark soon. Wouldn't be right to leave a lady alone out here." She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, leaving smudges of dirt across her sun-kissed skin. "Tabitha Preston," she offered, then gestured to the small grave. "This was all I had left of him. My boy, Samuel," her voice broke. "Fever took him 3 weeks ago, just shy of his first birthday." Wade's chest tightened. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, Mrs. Preston." "Miss," she corrected, rising shakily to her feet. "His father never stayed to know him." Wade tightened his grip on his hat, feeling the familiar anger that rose whenever he encountered a man who'd abandoned his responsibilities. In the 8 years since the war ended, he'd seen too many broken families, too many women left to fend for themselves in this harsh country. "The boot was all I had left," Tabitha continued, dusting the soil from her worn calico skirt. I couldn't bear to keep it, seeing it every day with no little foot to fill it, but I couldn't bear to leave it behind either when I sold the homestead." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "Foolish, isn't it, burying an empty boot?" "Not foolish at all," Wade said, his voice low and gentle. "Seems right fitting to me." The wind picked up, whistling through the sparse grass. In the distance, dark clouds were gathering, promising the first real storm of the season. Wade looked from the clouds to Tabitha, noting her small pack and the absence of any horse or wagon. "Where are you headed, Miss Preston?" "Fort Benton," she replied. "My cousin works at the mercantile there, said she could find me work." Wade calculated the distance in his head. "That's near 40 miles from here." "I'm aware," she said, a touch of defiance in her voice. "I've been walking for 3 days already." Wade considered his options. Helena was west, Fort Benton northeast. Taking her would add days to his journey, but the thought of leaving her to walk alone through open country with a storm coming didn't sit well with him. "I'd be honored to escort you," he said finally. "My horse can carry us both to the next town at least." Suspicion flashed in her eyes. "Why would you do that, Mr. Blackett? You don't know me." "No, madam, I don't," he agreed. "But my ma raised me to believe a man's measured by how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." He gestured to the darkening sky. "Besides, that storm's going to break before sunset. Would ease my conscience to know you've got shelter." Tabitha looked at the grave one last time, her fingers tracing the crude cross. "I was going to stay until sunset," she said softly. "To say a proper goodbye." Wade nodded, moving to stand beside her. "Then I'll stay too, if you don't mind the company." The wind carried the scent of rain as they stood in silence. two strangers united by respect for a tiny grave that held nothing but a boot and a mother's broken heart. The sunset painted the clouds in brilliant oranges and purples, nature's tribute to a child neither of them had known. As the last rays of light disappeared behind the mountains, Wade gently touched Tabitha's elbow. "Time to go, Miss Preston. Storm's almost upon us." Tabitha took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you for waiting, Mr. Blackett." "Wade," he corrected, leading her to his horse. "Best we find ourselves some shelter for the night." He helped her onto the palomino before mounting behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the shared saddle. They rode in silence as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, washing away their tracks behind them. The nearest settlement was Clearwater Creek, a small cluster of buildings that barely qualified as a town. By the time they reached the single boarding house, rain was falling in sheets, and both riders were soaked to the skin. Wade paid for 2 rooms from his dwindling funds, ignoring the suspicious glance from the proprietor's wife. "Supper's extra," the woman said, eyeing Tabitha's bedraggled appearance. Wade placed another coin on the counter. 2 meals, then." The small dining room was empty save for a traveling salesman who kept to himself in the corner. Wade pulled out a chair for Tabitha, noting how she kept her eyes downcast, her hands trembling slightly as she removed her damp shawl. "You're shivering," he observed as they waited for their food. "The fire's good and hot if you want to move closer." She shook her head. "I'm fine, thank you." After a moment she added, "You didn't need to pay for my room and board, I have some money." "Consider it neighborly," Wade replied. "Besides, I've been riding alone for weeks. The company's welcome." Their meals arrived: simple beef stew with bread, and Wade watched as Tabitha ate with the careful restraint of someone who'd known hunger. Despite her obvious fatigue, there was a quiet dignity in her posture that spoke of inner strength. "Have you been in Montana Territory long?" he asked, breaking the silence. 2 years, she replied. "My husband, well, I thought he was to be my husband, brought me west from Pennsylvania with promises of land and prosperity." Her lips tightened. "He left when I told him I was with child, said he wasn't ready for a family." Wade felt his jaw clench. Some men don't deserve the title. "And you, Mr. Blackett, where do you call home?" "Wade," he reminded her gently. "No place particular these days. Grew up in Missouri, fought with the Union, drifted west after the war." He didn't mention the nightmares that still woke him, the faces of fallen comrades that haunted his dreams. "Been working cattle drives mostly, some ranch work when I can find it." "Is that what brings you to these parts, ranch work?" Wade nodded. "Heard the rocking bee outside Helena needs experienced hands. Thought I'd try my luck there." "That's in the opposite direction of Fort Benton," Tabitha observed, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time since they'd met. "So it is," Wade acknowledged with a slight smile. "But Fort Benton has work too, I reckon. A man can find employment anywhere if he's not too proud about the nature of it." Tabitha studied him, her expression unreadable. "You change your plans for a stranger." "I'd see a lady safely to her destination," he corrected. "Seems the decent thing to do." For the first time, a genuine smile softened her features. "You're an unusual man, Wade Blackett. Just trying to live by my own measure, Miss Preston." "Tabitha," she said softly, "if we're to be traveling companions, you might as well use my given name." After supper, they parted ways in the narrow hallway between their rooms. Wade tipped his hat, still damp from the rain. "Sleep well, Tabitha. We'll get an early start if that suits you." She nodded, her hand on the doorknob. "Thank you for today, for staying with me until sunset." "It meant more than I can say." "No thanks needed," he replied. "Some moments shouldn't be faced alone." As he settled into his narrow bed that night, listening to the rain against the window, Wade found himself thinking of the small grave on the prairie, and the quiet strength of the woman who'd buried an empty boot as a final act of motherly love. He'd known grief in his 32 years, too much of it during the war, but there was something about Tabitha Preston that spoke to him in a language beyond words. Perhaps it was the way she carried her sorrow, not as a weight that bent her shoulders, but as a mantle of dignity. Morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of purpose. They set out after a simple breakfast, Tabitha seated behind Wade this time, her small pack secured to the saddle. She held onto his waist lightly, maintaining as much distance as the shared horse would allow. But as the hours passed and the terrain grew rougher, her grip gradually tightened. They stopped at midday beside a clear stream to rest the horse and eat the bread and cheese the boarding house owner had packed for them. Wade watched as Tabitha removed her boots and dipped her feet in the cool water, sighing with relief. "Your feet are blistered," he observed, noticing the angry red marks as she pulled her stockings back on. "Walking 40 miles will do that," she replied wryly. Wade shook his head in admiration. "You're a determined woman, Tabitha Preston." "I've had to be," she said simply. "This country doesn't favor the weak." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "But there's a difference between being strong and believing you have to bear everything alone." She glanced at him sharply. "Are you offering advice, Cowboy?" "Just an observation," Wade replied, unperturbed by her tone. "I've seen plenty of strong, prideful folks in wooden boxes because they wouldn't accept help when they needed it." Tabitha was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "You're right, of course, and here I am, accepting your help." She looked up at him, her expression softening. "I'm grateful, truly. It's just been a long time since I could rely on anyone but myself." "I understand that better than you might think." They continued their journey through rolling hills covered with spring wildflowers, the landscape a stark contrast to the sadness Tabitha carried within her. Wade found himself telling her about his younger days in Missouri, about his mother who'd taught school and his father who'd worked the railroads. He shared tales of cattle drives and the characters he'd met along the way, pleased when he occasionally coaxed a laugh from her. In turn, Tabitha spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania. Her dreams of becoming a teacher before love and promises of adventure had lured her west. She spoke of her son only briefly, describing his smile and the way his eyes had crinkled when he laughed. But Wade could hear the love in every carefully chosen word. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow, with Wade insisting that Tabitha take the only bedroll while he made do with his saddle blanket. As they sat before the small fire, the vastness of the Montana sky stretching endlessly above them, Wade felt a curious peace settle over him. "Do you ever regret coming west?" he asked, poking at the embers with a stick. Tabitha considered the question, her face golden in the firelight. "Even with everything that's happened, no. There's a freedom here that I never knew back east." She looked up at the stars. Samuel knew that freedom, brief as his life was. He was born under this sky, learned to crawl on prairie grass. Her voice caught. "That's worth something." Wade nodded, understanding completely. "The land gets in your blood, hard to explain to those who haven't felt it." "Exactly." She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What about you? Any regrets?" Wade stared into the flames, memories flickering through his mind like shadows. "Some," he admitted. "Wish I'd been home when my mother passed. Wish I'd made peace with some ghosts from the war." He glanced at her. "But coming west? No. Despite everything, this feels like where I'm meant to be." Tabitha's eyes met his across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps, or simply the comfort of honest conversation after too much solitude. "We should get some rest," Wade said finally, breaking the spell. "Still have a good distance to cover tomorrow." As he settled onto his makeshift bed, staring up at the star-filled sky, Wade realized it had been years since he'd shared so much of himself with anyone. There was something about Tabitha Preston that made it easy to lower the guards he'd built so carefully around his heart. The night passed peacefully, and they set out at dawn, making good time across the increasingly familiar territory. By late afternoon on their third day of travel, the buildings of Fort Benton came into view, perched above the Missouri River. "There it is," Wade said, feeling an unexpected reluctance as they approached the bustling river port. "Your cousin's expecting you." Yes, though not for another week or so, Tabitha replied, her arms still loosely encircling his waist. She'll be surprised to see me arrive on horseback rather than by foot. Wade guided his horse down the main street, past steamboats docked along the levee and warehouses bustling with activity. Fort Benton served as the primary shipping point for goods heading to and from the Montana goldfields, and the streets were crowded with freight wagons, miners, traders, and soldiers from the nearby military post. Which mercantile does your cousin work at? Wade asked, navigating through the busy thoroughfare. Thornton's, Tabitha replied. It should be near the end of this street, according to her letters. They found the store easily enough, a large establishment with glass windows displaying everything from farm implements to ladies' hats. Wade helped Tabitha dismount, suddenly aware that their journey was ending. I'm much obliged for your escort, Wade, she said formally, smoothing her skirt. I don't know how to repay such kindness. No payment necessary, he replied, feeling strangely awkward now that they had reached their destination. It was my pleasure. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with things unsaid. Then the mercantile door opened, and a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Tabitha emerged, her eyes widening in surprise. Tabitha, is that you? The woman rushed forward, embracing her cousin. We weren't expecting you for at least another week. Hello, Eliza, Tabitha returned the embrace, then stepped back. I had unexpected assistance on my journey. This is Wade Blackett. He's been kind enough to bring me all the way from. She paused, seeming to realize they had never named the place where they had met. From where we buried Samuel's boot. Eliza's expression softened with sympathy. Mr. Blackett, we're in your debt. Please, won't you come inside? My husband would want to thank you properly. Wade shifted uncomfortably. That's kind, madam, but I should be seeing to my horse and finding lodgings for the night. Nonsense, Eliza insisted. We have rooms above the store. You'll stay with us tonight, at the very least. She looked between Wade and Tabitha, a speculative gleam in her eye. Any friend of Tabitha's is welcome in our home. Before Wade could protest further, a tall, barrel-chested man emerged from the store. Eliza, who's this then? His gaze fell on Tabitha and his face broke into a wide smile. Why, it's Cousin Tabitha. Welcome, welcome. He looked at Wade, extending a meaty hand. And who might you be, sir? Wade Blackett, Wade replied, shaking the offered hand. Just helped Miss Preston reach her destination safely. Theodore Thornton, the man introduced himself, and I insist you join us for supper. Any man who'd escort a lady across open country deserves a hot meal and good company, at the very least. Wade found himself ushered inside the mercantile and up a narrow staircase to the family's living quarters above. The Thorntons were clearly prosperous. Their home was comfortably furnished with carpets from back east and a piano in the corner of the parlor. Wade felt distinctly out of place in his trail-worn clothes, but the Thorntons' genuine hospitality gradually eased his discomfort. Throughout the evening meal, Wade noticed how Tabitha seemed to come alive in the warmth of her cousin's home. She smiled more freely, even laughed at Theodore's jokes. Yet occasionally, he would catch her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, something between gratitude and something deeper that made his heart beat a little faster. After supper, Theodore insisted on showing Wade around Fort Benton, pointing out potential employment opportunities and introducing him to various business owners. By the time they returned to the mercantile, Wade had secured a position helping to load steamboats at the levee. Hard work, but well paid. You're staying then? Tabitha asked when he mentioned the job, her voice carefully neutral as they sat in the Thorntons' parlor having tea before retiring. For a time, Wade replied. Seems as good a place as any to winter over. River will freeze soon enough and the loading work will keep me busy until then. And then, she pressed gently. Wade shrugged. Haven't thought that far ahead. Maybe head to Helena come spring like I'd planned. Eliza exchanged a glance with her husband. Well, we're delighted you'll be in Fort Benton for a while, Mr. Blackett. Tabitha will be working in the store with me, so I'm sure your paths will cross often. Indeed, Theodore added with a meaningful smile. Fort Benton may be growing, but it's still a small enough community that folks tend to see a great deal of each other. Wade caught the not-so-subtle matchmaking attempt and saw Tabitha's cheeks flush with color. But rather than feeling trapped or manipulated, he found himself oddly pleased by the prospect of seeing her regularly. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Wade worked long hours at the levee, loading cargo onto the last steamboats before winter closed the river to navigation. In the evenings, he often found himself at the Thorntons' table for supper, drawn by their genuine friendship and, increasingly, by Tabitha's presence. She had taken well to working in the mercantile, her natural intelligence and quick learning impressing both her cousins and their customers. The deep grief that had marked her features when Wade first met her hadn't disappeared. He sometimes caught her staring into the distance with that same haunted look, but it had softened, giving way to quiet resilience. One crisp October evening, nearly a month after their arrival in Fort Benton, Wade found Tabitha alone on the Thorntons' small back porch, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. The setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold, not unlike the sunset they had witnessed together beside a small grave on the prairie. "Mind if I join you?" Wade asked, standing at the door. She turned, offering a small smile. "Please do." Wade settled beside her on the wooden bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Theodore mentioned you received a letter today," he said. "Good news, I hope." Tabitha's expression clouded. "Not exactly. It was from Samuel's father." Wade felt a surge of protective anger. What does he want after all this time? He heard about Samuel's passing somehow, offered belated condolences, and she hesitated. He asked if I would consider reconciling, said he's changed, established himself in business in Denver. The tightness in Wade's chest surprised him with its intensity. "And what do you think about that?" Tabitha was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "There was a time when I would have given anything to hear those words from him. When I was carrying Samuel, when I was struggling alone." She shook her head. "But now, I feel nothing but pity for a man who never knew his son, who missed the wonder of watching him grow, brief as that time was." Relief flooded through Wade, followed immediately by guilt. What right did he have to feel relieved? Tabitha deserved happiness wherever she might find it. "Will you write back to him?" he asked, working to keep his voice neutral. "I already have," she replied. "I thanked him for his letter and wished him well in his new life. But I made it clear that my future lies elsewhere." Her eyes met his, steady and clear. "I've learned the difference between a man who makes promises and a man who simply does what needs doing without fanfare or expectation." Wade felt the weight of her gaze, understanding the unspoken comparison. "Tabitha, you don't need to say anything," she interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know that I've made my choice. I'm staying in Fort Benton, building a new life here." Before Wade could respond, Eliza called from inside the house, announcing that supper was ready. The moment passed, but Wade carried Tabitha's words with him throughout the evening, turning them over in his mind like precious stones. As winter descended on Fort Benton, transforming the landscape with a blanket of snow and freezing the Missouri River solid, Wade found more reasons to spend time with Tabitha. With the steamboat work suspended until spring, he took odd jobs around town, including helping Theodore with inventory and deliveries at the mercantile. These tasks often brought him into Tabitha's orbit, allowing him to observe her quiet competence and the gradual return of joy to her life. They began taking Sunday afternoon walks together, bundled against the cold, exploring the snow-covered town and the hills beyond. During these walks, their conversations deepened, moving beyond polite exchange into genuine sharing of hopes, fears, and memories. "Do you ever think about having a family of your own?" Tabitha asked him one Sunday as they stood atop a hill overlooking the frozen river, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. The question caught Wade off guard. I did once, he admitted, before the war. Had a sweetheart back in Missouri, plans to marry when I returned. He paused, the old pain a distant ache now. She didn't wait. Can't blame her. 3 years is a long time, and I came back changed. The war changed everyone, Tabitha said softly. My father was never the same after Gettysburg. Wade nodded, understanding completely. For a long time after, I couldn't see myself as anyone's husband, anyone's father, the things I'd seen done. He trailed off, then looked at her directly. But lately, I've been reconsidering. The color that rose in Tabitha's cheeks had nothing to do with the cold. Have you? Yes, he said simply. Finding the right person has a way of changing a man's perspective. They stood in weighted silence, the unspoken hanging between them like the crystalline air. Then Tabitha slipped her gloved hand into his, and they walked back toward town together, connected by more than just their joined hands. As Christmas approached, Fort Benton prepared for its annual holiday celebrations, with the mercantile becoming a hub of activity. Wade helped Theodore hang evergreen boughs and red ribbons throughout the store, stealing glances at Tabitha as she assisted customers with their holiday purchases. On Christmas Eve, the Thorntons hosted a small gathering, inviting several friends and neighbors to share in a festive supper. The parlor was warm and bright, with candles glowing on the small tree in the corner and presents wrapped in colorful paper stacked beneath it. Wade had agonized over his gift for Tabitha, wanting it to be meaningful without presuming too much. In the end, he had commissioned a local silversmith to create a simple locket, inside which he placed a small pressed wildflower from the Montana prairie, a reminder of the journey that had brought them together. When Tabitha opened it, tears sprang to her eyes. It's beautiful, she whispered, touching the delicate silver. Will you help me put it on? Wade fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin, sending a current of awareness through them both. The locket rested just below her throat, catching the candlelight as she turned to face him. I have something for you as well, she said, handing him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Wade found a hand-knitted scarf in a deep blue that matched his eyes, and a folded piece of paper. Opening it, he found a sketch of himself as he'd appeared that first day, standing beside a small grave with his hat in his hands, his expression one of quiet respect. I've been practicing my drawing, Tabitha explained softly. I wanted to capture that moment, the moment a stranger showed more compassion than some show in a lifetime. Wade's throat tightened with emotion. This means more to me than I can say. Merry Christmas, Wade, she said, her eyes holding his. Merry Christmas, Tabitha. Later that evening, as the guests prepared to leave, snow began falling in soft, thick flakes. Wade stood on the porch with Tabitha, watching the white blanket deepen on the silent street. I should get back to my lodgings before this gets any worse, he said reluctantly. Wait, Tabitha touched his arm. There's something I've been wanting to tell you, something I've been afraid to say. Wade turned to face her fully, snow collecting on the brim of his hat and on her shawl-covered shoulders. You can tell me anything, Tabitha, you know that. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. When Samuel died, I thought my heart had died with him. I couldn't imagine ever feeling anything but grief again. She touched the locket at her throat. But these past months with you, I've found myself looking forward to each new day in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Wade's heart thundered in his chest. Tabitha, please let me finish, she said gently. I'll always carry Samuel with me. He'll always be my first child, my sweet boy. But I've realized that loving him doesn't mean I can't open my heart to love again. Her voice dropped to a whisper. To loving you. Wade reached out, cupping her face with a tenderness that surprised even him. I've been trying to find the right words, the right moment to tell you how I feel, he said, his voice rough with emotion. From that first day, watching you honor your son with such dignity and love, something in me recognized something in you, like my soul knew yours somehow. A tear slipped down Tabitha's cheek, and he brushed it away with his thumb. I love you, Tabitha Preston. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you face the world even when it's broken your heart. If you'd allow me, I'd like to stand beside you for all the days to come through whatever joys or sorrows life brings. I would like that very much, she whispered, her lips curving into a smile that reached her eyes. The snow fell around them as Wade leaned down, pressing his lips gently to hers in a kiss that held all the promise of new beginnings. When they parted, Tabitha rested her head against his chest, and Wade held her close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that had begun with a small grave on the prairie and a baby boot buried beneath Montana soil. Spring came early to Fort Benton in 1879, with March bringing warm Chinook winds that melted the snow and awakened the dormant grass on the surrounding plains. The Missouri River broke free of its icy chains, and steamboats once again plied the waters, bringing goods and passengers from St. Louis and points east. Wade and Tabitha were married on the first Saturday in April in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Benton. Eliza stood as Tabitha's attendant, while Theodore stood with Wade. The bride wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Eliza had insisted on ordering from St. Louis, with the silver locket as her only adornment. I, Wade Blackett, take thee, Tabitha Preston, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Wade said, his voice clear and steady as he placed a simple gold band on her finger. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. As Tabitha repeated the vows, her eyes never leaving his, Wade felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was where he belonged, with this woman who had known profound grief, yet still found the courage to love again. The small reception that followed at the Thorntons' home was a joyous affair, with friends and neighbors offering congratulations and good wishes. Theodore proposed a toast, his voice thick with emotion. To Wade and Tabitha, he said, raising his glass. May your life together be blessed with love, laughter, and the strength to face whatever comes your way together. Later, as the celebration continued, Wade found Tabitha standing alone by the window, a pensive expression on her face. Having second thoughts, Mrs. Blackett, he asked softly, coming to stand beside her. She looked up at him, her smile dispelling his momentary concern. Not at all. Just thinking about how strange life's journey can be, if you hadn't happened upon me that day. I've come to believe it wasn't chance, Wade said, taking her hand. Some things are meant to be, even if the path that leads to them is harder than we'd wish. Tabitha nodded, squeezing his hand. I went to that place to say goodbye to one chapter of my life. I never imagined I was actually saying hello to another. Speaking of new chapters, Wade said, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. He guided her to a quiet corner of the room, away from the other guests. Theodore offered me a partnership in the mercantile yesterday. Tabitha's eyes widened. Wade, that's wonderful. What did you say? I told him I needed to discuss it with my wife, Wade replied with a smile. It would mean staying in Fort Benton permanently, building our life here. The business is doing well, and with the new military contracts Theodore secured, it should continue to prosper. Do you want to accept? Tabitha asked, studying his face. I know you've always valued your freedom, the ability to move on when the spirit moves you. Wade considered her words. There was a time when I needed that, the open road, new horizons, but now, he touched her cheek gently. Now I find I'm looking for different kinds of adventures, building a home, putting down roots, creating a family. A soft blush colored Tabitha's cheeks. A family. If you're agreeable, Wade said, his heart in his throat. I'd like very much to be a father someday, to raise children with you here in this town where we found each other. Tabitha's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. I would like that too, very much. Their conversation was interrupted by Theodore calling for the couple to cut the wedding cake, but the look that passed between them held all the promise of the future they would build together. Summer brought prosperity to Fort Benton and to the newly expanded Thornton and Blackett mercantile. Wade took to business with unexpected aptitude, his natural charm and fairness earning the respect of customers and suppliers alike. Tabitha continued working in the store, her keen eye for detail and organization proving invaluable as the business grew. In August, on a warm Sunday afternoon, Wade took Tabitha on a picnic to the hills overlooking the town. They spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree, enjoying the simple meal Tabitha had packed and the rare leisure time away from the bustling store. "I have something to tell you," Tabitha said as they sat side by side, watching the distant river glinting in the sunlight. There was something in her voice that made Wade turn to look at her fully. "What is it?" Tabitha took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, come February if the doctor's estimation is correct." Joy surged through Wade, so intense it nearly took his breath away. "A baby, you're certain?" Tabitha nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Harris confirmed it yesterday." "I wanted to tell you somewhere special, not in the midst of inventory or customer orders." Wade gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "Tabitha, my love, you've made me the happiest man in the territory." He pulled back slightly to look into her face. "Are you happy, truly?" She nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Happier than I ever thought possible again, but also a little frightened," she admitted. "After Samuel." "I understand," Wade said, holding her close again. "It's natural to be afraid, but we'll face this together, whatever comes." "I've been thinking," Tabitha said after a moment, "if it's a boy, I'd like to name him William, after your father." "And if it's a girl?" Wade asked. "Sarah, after my mother," Tabitha replied. "With your approval, of course." "William or Sarah Blackett," Wade said, testing the names. "Both sound just right to me." They lingered on the hillside until sunset, making plans and sharing dreams for their growing family. As the sky turned to gold and then to deepening purple, Wade was reminded of another sunset, a year and a half earlier, when he had stood beside a grieving woman at a tiny grave. "We should visit Samuel's resting place sometime," he said quietly as they packed up their picnic. "Properly mark his grave if you'd like." Tabitha looked at him with such love it made his heart ache. "I'd like that very much. He should know about his little brother or sister, and about the good man who became my husband." The months of Tabitha's pregnancy passed quickly, filled with preparations and anticipation. Wade insisted on building the baby's cradle himself, spending evenings in the small workshop behind their new home, carefully shaping and sanding the wood until it was perfect. Tabitha sewed tiny garments, sometimes pausing with a faraway look in her eyes that Wade knew meant she was remembering Samuel. On those occasions, he would simply sit beside her, offering silent comfort and understanding. Their shared knowledge of grief made the joy of expectation all the more precious. Neither took for granted the blessing growing within Tabitha's body. February brought bitter cold and heavy snow to Fort Benton. On the night of the 15th, Wade paced anxiously in the parlor of their home while Dr. Harris and Eliza attended Tabitha in the bedroom upstairs. Theodore kept him company, attempting to distract him with talk of business and the spring shipments expected on the first steamboats. After what seemed an eternity, a cry pierced the silence, the strong, indignant wail of a newborn announcing its arrival. Wade froze, his heart pounding, until Eliza appeared at the top of the stairs, her face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Wade," she called down. "You have a healthy daughter, and Tabitha is doing just fine." Wade took the stairs two at a time, pausing only briefly to shake the doctor's hand before entering the bedroom. Tabitha lay propped against the pillows, her face flushed and damp with perspiration but radiant with joy. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, lay a tiny bundle with a shock of dark hair. "Sarah Eliza Blackett," Tabitha said softly as Wade approached the bed. "Come meet your daughter, Papa." Wade sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling slightly as Tabitha placed the infant in his arms. Sarah's eyes were closed, her tiny face peaceful in sleep, her perfect fingers curled against the blanket. "She's beautiful," Wade whispered, overcome with emotion. "Just like her mother." Tabitha reached out to stroke the baby's cheek. "I felt Samuel with us tonight," she said quietly. "Watching over his sister, is that strange?" Wade shook his head, his throat tight. "Not strange at all, I believe he was." In the quiet of their bedroom, with the snow falling gently outside and their daughter sleeping in his arms, Wade Blackett felt a sense of completion he had never known before. The journey that had begun on a dusty plain with a chance encounter had led him here, to this moment of perfect joy. As spring returned to the northern plains, Wade and Tabitha took their daughter on a journey. They traveled for 2 days by wagon, following landmarks Wade remembered from their first meeting, until they reached the small grave marked by a crude cross made of twigs bound with twine. The cross had weathered but still stood, a testament to the child who had rested there, and to the mother who had loved him enough to mark his memory with the burial of a tiny boot. Wade had brought a proper marker, a small headstone carved with Samuel Preston's name and the dates of his brief life. While Wade carefully replaced the weathered cross with the stone marker, Tabitha sat nearby with Sarah in her arms, speaking softly to her daughter about the brother she would never meet, but whose memory would always be honored in their family. When Wade finished, he joined his wife and daughter, sitting beside them in the spring grass now dotted with wildflowers. He placed his hat on the ground beside him, just as he had that first day, and took Tabitha's hand in his. "Thank you," she said, her eyes on the new headstone, "for understanding why this was important." "Of course," Wade replied simply. They stayed until sunset, the three of them together in the vastness of the Montana prairie, watching as the sky painted itself in brilliant colors above them. As the last rays of light disappeared behind the distant mountains, Wade helped Tabitha to her feet. "Time to go home," he said gently, cradling Sarah in one arm while offering his other hand to Tabitha. She took it, glancing one last time at the small grave with its new marker. "Yes," she agreed, her voice steady and sure. "Let's go home." They walked together to the waiting wagon, a family forged from chance and choice, from grief and love, moving forward into the promise of their shared future. Behind them, the prairie stretched vast and eternal under the emerging stars, a silent witness to the journey that had brought them together and the life they had built from the ashes of loss. As the years passed, Fort Benton flourished, and so did the Blackett family. Sarah was joined by 2 brothers, William Theodore, born in 1881, and James Franklin, who arrived in 1883. The Thornton and Blackett mercantile expanded to include a second location in the growing town of Great Falls, with Theodore overseeing one store and Wade the other. Tabitha never forgot her firstborn son, and each year on his birthday, the family would visit his grave, bringing fresh flowers and sharing stories that kept his memory alive for his siblings. Sarah, Will, and James grew up understanding that love transcended the boundaries between life and death, and that their family included a brother who watched over them from above. In 1898, 20 years after Wade had first seen Tabitha burying a baby boot on the Montana prairie, they stood together watching their daughter marry a young rancher from the Judith Basin. As Sarah and her new husband exchanged vows beneath an arbor of spring flowers, Wade squeezed Tabitha's hand. "Did you ever imagine, that day we met, that we'd be standing here now?" he asked softly. Tabitha shook her head, her sage green eyes now gently lined with the passage of time meeting his. "Never. You were just a kind stranger who removed his hat and stayed until sunset." "Best decision I ever made," Wade replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "Staying with you until sunset, and all the sunsets since." Tabitha smiled, the grief that had once defined her now just one thread in the rich tapestry of a life well lived. "And all the sunsets yet to come," she promised, leaning against the shoulder of the man who had helped her find joy again when she thought it lost forever. Together, they watched their daughter begin her own journey, surrounded by family and friends, beneath the vast Montana sky that had witnessed their own beginning so many years before.